Thanks everybody again for joining us. If you've joined us before, we're doing these once a quarter. So this is our second one for the ADA and kind of repeating, but I think it's really important. We really want to help employees with information, what you need to know. And why does this apply? One of the big questions we think is, well, I don't have a disability. This doesn't apply to me. So hopefully we can help you understand how it might apply to you or an employee that you work with. We're going to do the purpose, clarify some definitions, discuss how to support employees through practical ADA accommodations. So let's get started. In the chat, we'd like you to go ahead and start adding in your name, department, and your favorite summer activity. I know we don't have our pool up this year, so that's been a little tricky for us, but anybody else have their favorite summer activities? While you are doing that, we have this, if you need captions or if you would like to do captions, if you go to the 3 dots in the top of your screen where it says more, click on that and then go down to language and speech. There's an option under there to select show live captions. So if you need that today or in any future presentations, that is one accommodation or something that was probably originally created as an accommodation that may help some people follow along. I like to watch the captioning on the television, which drives my kids nuts, but I'm there. That's my all right. So we saw some things about gardening, going to the beach. Ooh, Lake Michigan. That's not the Wisconsin Dells, right? That's different. Anybody else have any other things? All right. Close to it. Okay. I've heard a lot of, summer cookouts. Yeah, there's nothing better than a grilled burger, I tell you what. All right. Those are some good things. So we'll get going so we can get into meat of some information. Here we go.
Hello, everyone. And I'm Jody Kuma, the other half of the Employee Leave Benefits team. So happy to be here. I've been with the city for 1 year, and my previous HR experience is with 30 years in the federal government, just varying from workers' compensation, leave management, performance, and federal benefits. I'm happy to be here. And again, thank you for joining us this afternoon. So our goal today is, of course, to share this information to help our employees become happier and better workers. We are here to talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act, otherwise known as the acronym ADA, and where and when it may apply. And as Beth mentioned, even if you're thinking, I don't have a disability, so this doesn't apply to me, but it could, and we're going to go through that. So as we're getting started, we again would like to hear from you, and we appreciate you sharing your favorite summertime activity. Stephanie is going to start a poll, and our question for you is what we would like to know is, how familiar are you with the ADA? So you should see that up on your screen, and if you could just mark one of those and hit the submit button. We'll see where our audience is at this afternoon.
I see some familiar names, so I would say there's probably people that are more in the middle than the not at all than they used to be.
Yes, that's right, Beth. We have 67% of folks in the middle, somewhat familiar, and a few folks who are very familiar, and a few who are not at all familiar. So that's
So we got a kind of a varying with knowledge. So perfect. Thank you all. And if you need to remove that survey from your screen, just hit the done button and it should go away. So moving on is basically in talking about the ADA, we have come up with the following items listed here to cover through today. And of course, we'll leave time for questions at the end. However, if you have questions going as we go through the information today, please drop them in the chat, and Beth and I will kind of tag team in answering those questions as we go through the presentation. So let's move on to our ADA topics, starting with, how does this apply to me? So there are so many situations occurring daily where an individual, or if we have supervisors, may not even realize a situation would apply as a reasonable accommodation under the ADA. So think about this. If you have ever gone through a medical situation and thought, my job would just be a bit easier, or if I could do XYZ a bit better if I were just able to, and then fill in the blank, your request could have been pursued under the ADA. We have known departments to approve an unrealistic accommodation for employees. Our team has coined the phrase ruinous empathy, in which we are trying to provide the employee with options to be nice. However, a few steps in the process may have unknowingly been missed in meeting the standards under the ADA. So next, we're going to discuss the basics to give you a foundation and understand why this is a concern for our team and how we are here to help.
Thanks, Jody. So the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law on July 26th, we're coming up on an anniversary, 1990, by President George H.W. Bush. In 2008, the act was amended and signed into law, which really just expanded the scope of the ADA. This landmark legislation really provides the first comprehensive civil rights protections for people with disabilities. It also prohibited discrimination in various areas of public life. That includes employment, public accommodations, transportation, telecommunications. Some of you may be familiar with aspects of the ADA through your job. The aim of the ADA is to ensure that individuals with disabilities have equal opportunities and can fully participate in society. Now, while all of the areas under the ADA are important, it is going to be the focus of this presentation to really focus on Title I, as we are employers, and this is an employment webinar. So as we're government entities, like I said, there are several of you in the city and county who may already be familiar with aspects of the ADA, such as in designing parks for Parks and Rec, or building and safety when we're designing buildings, or people are putting in permits to put up buildings. LTU has streets and sidewalks and transportation. Engineering has aspects of the ADA, and any department really who has interactions with the public, the ADA could be, you could be impacted by the ADA. One of the things we have to do is make sure that those we serve have equal access, both physical and in communication. Technology has advanced and made things much easier in many ways. Like I said, I like to watch movies with the words on the screen, which I can't say my kids do. But there continue to be advancements and situations where we can still do much better. One of the things I've been to webinars and they've talked about is this was enacted in 1990. It's kind of amazing that we're only as far as we are, because there's still a lot to do. So the first question that we usually look at under Title I is who is covered. And so this slide kind of breaks it down. If the employer has more than 15 employees, the definitions, you can see I've got some things bolded here, but employees with disabilities who are able to perform the essential job functions, some of you have heard me say essential job functions in conversations, with or without a reasonable accommodation, and reasonable can become a big word. I think it's important to note that employee does include applicants, probationary, so of course full-time and part-time employees like we usually think about, but our temporary, seasonal, on-call, and volunteer employees or individuals also count under Title I in making sure they have access If a volunteer needs to be able to apply if they are blind, for example, or have a hearing disability. So that's the who. The next question, what qualifies as a disability? So you can see in the definition on our slide, it's a physical or mental impairment with the biggest factor being the disabling condition substantially limits major life activities. Remember that disabilities can be visible, so something you can see like a wheelchair or maybe a hearing aid, crutches, but it can also be invisible. We have employees with migraines, arthritis, mental health. Scent has become a bigger concern. We've had about 4 departments that we've worked with employees who get migraines and can't breathe because of different perfumes in your hairspray or laundry detergent. Remember too that not all disabling conditions require an accommodation. So now that we've discussed who and what, let's start to see how this works in action.
Many everyday conveniences we now take for granted were shaped or required by the Americans with Disabilities Act. Let's think about our daily life, places we go to shop or you go to have fun, in addition, or just coming into work. There are a lot of things available to us now which were originally implemented for individuals with disabilities that we, as normal people, take for granted. Let's think about this just for a second. So, what are some examples that you can think of that you probably make use of on an everyday basis that is available as a result of the ADA? We would like to hear your answers within the chat.
What do you guys think about?
And as you're thinking about this, Beth talked about the closed captioning that she enjoys implementing. Some of you might have an ergonomic keyboard. We got, ramps, elevators. Oh, an ice cream machine. Automatic opening doors, yes.
I don't know if you can see it. I have my pretty mouse that's a little bit thicker than normal. I like my ergonomic mouse.
Yeah, the ergonomic mouse, using the ramps instead of stairs.
Oh, does anybody voice to text on their cell phone?
Yep, headset to take phone calls.
I think we all probably use the elevator if we come into the city county building.
Yeah, these are all great examples of the everyday. So other things, just kind of like the stall, when you go into the restroom, the grab bars within the stalls, ergonomic chairs, flexible work schedules, service animals for some of individuals and such. So thank you. Standing desk. So it is in the afternoon. Another thing that we're going to move on with is that even though you may not be personally impacted by disability, there is many different aspects of work that could be affected by one. So take a look, there's a poll, a list of everyday work activities, and select the ones that you might think may be impacted by disability. And you should be able to select more than one as you view the activity. So make sure there is a slide bar down. So take a look and the question is, this is a list of everyday work activities and select the ones that you might think may be impacted by disability.
Kind of makes you think.
It does.
I went to a training a while ago and it was amazing the list that we came up with at that training about all the things that really started because of someone with a disability. And it's amazing all the things that we use every day that we don't even think about. So it is interesting to me how that has made everyone's lives better. All
So it
right.
looks like we're getting some results in.
Now, hopefully this is not cheat. I think it's fine timing to cheat a little bit, but hopefully you selected all of them.
Needs a select all button is what Kelly or Keel mentioned. You Keel, you get a plus, a gold star for today. So yes, basically this exercise reminds us how varied the disabilities can be. And then as Beth has mentioned, is many aren't visible. So disabilities can affect, the mobility, vision, hearing, the focusing, those who may have chronic pain, and just more. So this is where reasonable accommodations aren't just about giving unfair advantages, they're about removing barriers to allow people to do their jobs. So thank you everyone for the input. And if you haven't removed the poll already, just please close that window.
I just want to tag on. I literally had a conversation in the parking lot last week with someone who said, how come my coworker gets to blah, 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 blah. And we had a little chat about allowing that coworker this one little adjustment probably helps them do their whole job. That if a little change or a little adjustment can help someone participate in being employed and having a paycheck, then I guess I personally think that's a small price to pay to help people be included and be able to do their best. We all would appreciate that, right? So if we individually have a need, that our employer would look at those individual needs. All right.
Thank you for sharing that, Beth. So this slide is outlining the different types of accommodations that an employee may need. And it generally falls into these three categories, which is temporary, ongoing, and one-time supports. The temporary accommodations are designed for situations such as where someone is recovering or managing a short-term medical condition. And then this might include the post-surgery recovery, a short-term medical limitation that the doctor put on the employee, or the need for additional leave. Typically, these accommodations last up to 6 months. Then our ongoing accommodations are for longer term needs. So these support individuals with mobility limitations, vision or hearing loss, or a chronic health condition that require consistent adjustments within the workplace. And then finally, we have the one-time accommodations. This could involve a single adjustment or a purchase, such as purchasing that assistive device, the stand-up desk, or the ergonomic chair. But this also supports, could be making a building modification or a sidewalk. And this is to ensure that someone can access their work environment effectively. So at times we have had instances to where we have determined an accommodation as temporary, but through the process, it moved to ongoing based off of the employee's situation.
I would just interject real quick and say that probably most of the cases that we deal with start off as temporary. And then at the end of that 6 months, we determine if it hasn't ended already, then that's when we would kind of, is this going to be ongoing or has it ended as a temporary accommodation?
Yes. Thank you, Beth. So together, these categories do help us respond appropriately to the wide range of needs while ensuring the employees can perform their essential job functions.
So let's look at accommodations in action. Accommodations may depend on job duties and availability. What's feasible for one role may not be feasible for another. If I am out maintaining and working on streets, working remote is a very different option than if I have an administrative office type job. Or if my job is front facing with people and the public coming in to ask questions, remote work is also going to be very different than someone who may be working in finance or something along those lines. Different jobs, even in the same department, can look very different with accommodations. Reasonableness is key. Not every request has to be approved exactly as desired, but all of the accommodations must be considered in good faith, and we really need to do a good evaluation of what's feasible, what's not feasible, what could we do. Reasonable accommodation examples could include things like I mentioned, remote work, schedule adjustment, technology, additional leave, changing cubicles, getting a different piece of equipment. There have been all sorts of things across the board that we've looked at. Another thing is, if similarly situated employees are allowed, then the accommodation is most likely considered reasonable and probably doesn't even need an accommodation if it's something that is just provided for employees who need them. What we kind of have to look at is what accommodations have been provided in the past for employees. It makes it hard to deny a current request. I've also had discussions with departments for the next point is a blanket, oh, well, we don't do accommodations approach is not compliant with the ADA. We at least have to have a discussion with the employee and review and evaluate that accommodation on an individual case-by-case basis. Although departments manage their own operations, it is noteworthy that funding for accommodations would be evaluated at the city budget or the county budget as a whole and not by those individual department budgets. So I know there was a comment one time that I'm not going to spend $500 on a device for an employee to do their job. And we looked at the laptop that the person was using to do their job. So we do have to look at reasonableness of providing tools and what they do and how often they'll be used to help make those decisions. A good rule of thumb is that if the accommodation would be provided for the highest and the lowest performer who are similarly situated, it's probably a fair and a reasonable accommodation. We have this human nature where, oh, this, let's say Jody, sorry, Jody. Jody's a really hard worker and we really want to let her do all of these things. That's great. But then let's say that you have another employee who is not as hardworking, and you are hesitating to provide them with the same accommodations. That's probably not going to be in fair and reasonable accommodation. I've given that advice to a lot of supervisors to look at what would you do for your highest and your lowest performer. We do want to make sure accommodations are equitable and consistent. Just please be aware it's not okay to provide an accommodation to someone which removes or changes job duties without engaging in the ADA process. When an accommodation is provided, or especially if we're going to deny it, outside of the ADA, there's a huge liability created, which may cost the employer fines related to violations. There's all sorts of things that can happen with a very negative consequences to the employer. In addition, an individual could now be considered to have a disability, even if they do not in fact have a disabling condition. So those are challenging to then remove if they become unreasonable or if someone else wants the same thing. So really running those accommodations through our department helps kind of check all the boxes and make sure that we're doing it in a legally compliant and safe way, if that makes sense.
Yes. So we're going to clarify an important point. Reasonable accommodations does not mean anything goes. So under the ADA, what's considerable reasonable depends on the specific situation. So every request is literally evaluated on a case-by-case basis. The purpose of an accommodation is to support that employee in performing the essential functions of the job. It is not to excuse their poor performance or if there is ongoing issues unrelated to the medical condition. For example, chronic tardiness or failing to communicate absences is not considered reasonable under the ADA. It's also important to remember that the ADA does not require the employer to reassign the essential job duties or to hire additional staff to cover parts of the job. The essential functions are determined by the job classification and the position description, and those responsibilities do remain in place. So overall, the goal is to find solutions that genuinely enable job performance while maintaining the integrity of the position. So Beth kind of hit on this a little bit, is when we do make decisions, past accommodations can influence future ones, so intentionally or not. That's why being consistent and well documented is essential. And when accommodations are handled informally or as an ad hoc basis, it creates compliance risks. Without proper documentation, it becomes harder to explain why certain decisions were made or to ensure similar requests are being handled fairly. This is also where risk comes into play, and we play that key role. We help evaluate the decisions that could set a precedent across the city or county and making sure that we're aligned, consistent, and following the guidelines. Ultimately, consistency protects both the organization and the employee by creating that fair, transparent, and defensible process. So let's go over how we get started.
So what do I do if I think I might need to request an accommodation, or if I have a coworker or an employee I see struggling with a task or struggling to meet some aspect of their job, and I have an awareness it might be medically related? How do I apply? What do I do? Generally, some type of notice is required to initiate the ADA process. It's best if requests originate from the employee or someone on their behalf. It could be as simple as a discussion with a supervisor or a leader. Often we'll get a medical note that will have accommodations and restrictions on them. It could be an employee noticing someone else struggling from what may appear to be a disabling condition. Now, sometimes it's not noticeable, but sometimes it could be, hey, that person can't get into the building or really struggles to get into the building, for example. Once a supervisor or a leader is aware of a potential ADA request, risk should be notified as soon as practical, as the employer is now on notice. As leaders, it's critical to be trained to know what you are listening for. Employees do not have to use the words ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, I want an accommodation. They don't have to use any of those specific words. It could just be discussing a concern or a problem with their supervisor, that they're having a challenge, or they bring up a medical issue is causing some kind of concern. That could be enough to alert a supervisor to reach out to our team, as the ADA may be relevant. Now, employees are encouraged, as they are with FMLA and injury reports, to submit requests proactively, and they should submit it themselves. Accommodations, however, are a little different in that they're considered going forward. For example, we're not able to go back and provide an accommodation 3 months ago that we didn't know about. So accommodations generally just move forward from the time that someone is notifying us and applying. In my experience, it has worked out best if the department or the individual who's concerned discusses the potential for an ADA accommodation with the person before they submit it to our team and before we reach out. You wouldn't like to be blindsided yourself if you didn't know something was in the works or coming. So it's nice if someone lets the person know, hey, I checked in with the risk department or HR, and it seems like this might apply under the ADA, so they're going to send you some information to help work through this with us. Risk will provide the guidance through the process and be happy to help find the necessary forms. Our request, like I said, is on that same link as we use for FMLA and work injuries. We've tried to make it easy. Information pulls in from Oracle to save some data entry. So that would be how a process would really get started. And then as we work through, the employee would receive an email from us. We have things like an outline of what to expect, medical certification, position description, and a medical release form. The outline is just telling people about what their rights. We like to keep people informed and let them know where their choices are and what steps are going to be taken. By reviewing the ADA medical certification and the position description, the physician is better able to really specifically tell us what the employee's needs are and what they might need as an accommodation medically in order to meet the expectations of their position. Remember, medical necessity is very different than someone's personal preference, and that's something that we evaluate as we go through. In signing and returning the medical release, the employee is allowing our team the opportunity to reach out to clarify things with a physician. If we need to clarify their medical history, request, medical requirements. Now, we're not looking for anything that everyone's ever been treated for. We are looking only for things that pertain to this request and this specific need. Our team does not share that medical information with the supervisor, with the department, with coworkers. The actual medical diagnosis stays confidential. While we do have to discuss how to meet the accommodation needs, if we're looking at a flexible schedule, we may need to talk about mornings are better or afternoons are easier in order to make that accommodation happen, but we don't have to discuss the exact diagnosis or any past history that we might be privy to. Once these forms are all returned, then we will reach out to schedule an interactive conversation.
Yes, the interactive conversation is basically required under the ADA. So risk management is the one who will set up this meeting and usually bring in the supervisor in as well. However, the employee can choose to have someone else join them for support, or they can request to meet only with risk if they feel more comfortable. The meeting itself is really just meant to be a discussion. It's not a place where final decisions have to be made on the spot. And if for some reason a department has already started the process, then risk will basically ask for any notes or background information so everyone is on the same page. Situations can be very unique, as we mentioned, to the disability and of course to the position because of the vast positions within the city and the county. And there is no one size fits all. So let's go over on what happens during the interactive conversation. The conversation is a very collaborative process where we will work with the employee to fully understand their situation and explore those possible solutions. First, we do confirm that there is a medical disability. And then, as we mentioned, we will determine whether that need is temporary, ongoing, or it's a one-time request. From there, we're going to identify the specific task based or the essential functions that the employee is having difficulty performing. So once we do understand the challenges, we're going to brainstorm potential accommodations that can support the employee's job performance. And this is a two-way discussion where both the employee and the employer can propose ideas. At times, many times as we go through this, the department does offer and has offered other solutions and resolutions. But we will also discuss, of course, any concerns about the suggested accommodations. So whether it's practical, effective, or it could create other challenges within the workplace. And then lastly, we're going to set the timelines for implementation of the accommodation and a follow-up to where we, as in risk, will follow up. So this is going to ensure the accountability, it provides structure, and helps us evaluate whether the solution is working as implemented. So speaking of evaluating, we're going to meet with the department leaders to review any logistics of the requests and understand how any potential accommodations might impact the work environment. So from there, we're going to do a thorough look at all the information gathered so far. So this includes the original request from the employee, the notes from our interactive conversation, then the suggested accommodations, and if there's any associated costs, if applicable. Our role is to weigh all of this factors carefully and consistently.
I'm just going to throw in one other real quick note that I've actually helped departments to go out and look. Sometimes there's grants and there's options available for those kinds of things. So we can help with that too.
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Beth. And then after completing this review is risk management. We will provide that written notification to the employee, their immediate supervisor, and the department leaders so everyone is aligned on the outcome and what the next steps are. So we've covered quite a few things, and it is in the afternoon on a Wednesday in the middle of a week after the holiday. So we do have where we want to hear from you all again. And you guys have been super quiet. Either we're covering this super well and you don't have questions, or you'll have questions later, which we're available for. So the question is what are some accommodations that maybe you've encountered, heard of, or you might have seen implemented within your area or have had past experience with? Oh, dogs. Thank you, Beth. If anyone has any experience or this is kind of fairly new. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Bob. Yep, quiet space. Lighting changes, perfect. Oh, lifting restrictions. Remote work, smells, odors. So yes, all very valid examples, schedule changes. Awesome. Ergonomic keyboard, perfect. Yes.
You guys are all experts. Maybe they should be doing our presentation.
Yeah.
And I just want to
Oh.
note, Jody and I did not dress the same today on purpose. It was completely a fluke. So I just was looking at our screen and noticed that. I was like, wow.
Thank you, Colleen. Yeah, that's another, I didn't realize that we've done that in the past. So thank you for sharing that.
All right. So we'll move on to a question we often get is, what is my part, or what do I have to do? So we're going to talk about everyone's responsibility in the ADA process and share a few ideal situations. Sometimes it's, well, that's between HR and the employee, or, I told my manager. And so we really just wanted to kind of check in on where everybody's responsibilities fit in. Employees generally have a responsibility. First of all, they have to notify and tell someone, or we have to have an observation. So there needs to be some kind of something that we know about. If we're following up on a medical note, for example, we're really going to reach out to the employee to get their buy-in and input. And hey, does this sound like the next reasonable step? This is where we would evaluate these things to help guide the process as needed. But it really does come to that consent from an employee. And then employees have to provide that documentation upon request. We really have to evaluate that medical necessity and can't do much without that. Employees have to, I shouldn't say employees have to, employees have the right to participate in the interactive process. It's very frustrating when decisions are made on your behalf when you haven't had input and they don't make sense and they're not really what the problem was. So that's partly why we do the interactive process. And then honor the process and the final decision. Like we said, we have to make reasonable accommodations. That doesn't necessarily mean that somebody may get every Friday off because that's what they would prefer. If you have an office of 6 people can't take Friday off all the time, or as their remote day for everybody. And then enter leave accommodation absences accurately. If it's not leave under an accommodation, well, I should say if it is leave under an accommodation, it's usually FMLA first. And then if FMLA ends, there are some options that we can walk through with consistency to help employees meet their needs, but yet we're managing absences and leave. And then employees do need to communicate any updates, changes, concerns. We don't have to wait for that next check-in date or that 6-month date to say, hey, this really isn't working. We also like to hear the opposite of this is working great and this is fantastic and I've been able to do my job. That's really nice feedback as well. So employee responsibilities. Supervisor department responsibilities. Again, notify risk. When you have an observation or someone reports something, tell us, notify us. Again, that origami link is our preference to get that process started. If you email us or call us, we're going to say, hey, fill out that request. So you can just do that. Participate in that interactive process and review the accommodations. I did an accommodation about a month ago where the supervisor was willing to switch their remote days, and that would not have been an option I would have thought about had that supervisor not been in that meeting. So it really is helpful to have everyone in there with their non-judgment hats on, where we're just evaluating and brainstorming. And then again, honor the process and the final decision. We really try to vet what's reasonable, what has been performed in the past, what can be done. I've had conversations with several supervisors and employees about why can't we do this? What's the hardship? What's the holdup? And that really needs to be more than, well, other employees get upset. Well, we just have to work through that. That's not a reason not to provide this person a helpful way to do their job, or we've never done that before. So we just work through those things. Supervisors help us verify those ADA leave accommodations and make sure that absences are entered accurately if those apply. And again, communicate. If something's not working, if something's not going the way it was intended, or there's problems, concerns, if it's going great, we love to hear that feedback as well. As you've all probably been aware, clear documentation helps support consistency, transparency, and it does protect both the employer and the employee. So risk guides the process to help ensure that accommodations are well documented, they align with the employee's functional limitations, and hopefully it works well for everybody on the team. One of the reasons we go through risk also is as an employer, we provide so many accommodations and options for employees. The mayor, city council, county board, they like to see the positive impact provided for our very employee-friendly workplace. So when we hear things like, well, my employer doesn't care about me or they don't do things for me, we've kind of got a track record and we've got some data to show all the things that we have done as an employer for employees, and it's pretty cool, frankly. So we have another poll question for you. Stephanie, you got this?
I do. It should be showing up right about now.
Perfect. So scenario 1, an employee asks to wear noise-canceling headphones most of the day to help manage anxiety and focus. Do you think this could be a reasonable accommodation under the ADA? Yes, no, or it depends? Do we have our answers in? Oh, we've got it. Nobody said no, so yay.
I was like, they're smart, yeah.
Nobody said no. So my response, Jody, what was your answer?
I answered, it depends.
Hey, me too. So if you answered yes, I would say that's not necessarily a wrong answer. Yes, it could be. But our answer with it depends is we really have to do that evaluation. Is there a medical necessity? What is the job requirements? Some jobs might be okay with that noise canceling headphones. If you are somewhere where the public comes in and you have to be able to pay attention and see someone coming in, that may not be a reasonable accommodation. So that would be something we would have to evaluate. It depends on if it would be approved or not. So if you all put it depends, go ahead and pat yourself on the back. All right, next scenario.
Even the yes answers are like, but you're learning and you're with us.
Nobody put
One
no,
more
that was great. Okay, Jody, do you want to read this one?
Sure. A staff member with a chronic health condition requests to shift their work schedule by an hour due to morning fatigue from some medication. So how should this request be handled?
I think they paid attention. Or that question, you know what, maybe that question was too easy and we need to find a few trickier questions. What do you think, Jody?
I think we're trying to trick them on this one maybe, but we have some smart individuals.
So very good. You want to get that accommodation going. We want to get the documentation. Even if we know we're probably going to approve it, it's still worth going through the process to make sure that we've dotted our I's, crossed our T's. And one of the things I've talked to departments about, it's not always this one that you're denying or approving, but if you have a future one that may be denied or approved, that's where not being consistent can come back to be a problem later on. So great job, guys. Thank you for participating. We really appreciate that. All right, so we have another option. An employee regularly arrives late to work and later claims it's due to a disability, but they never made a formal accommodation request. Should this be handled as a performance concern, an ADA request, or both? What do you guys think? All right, we've got some performance concerns and we've got some people saying both.
Both, yeah.
Jody, what was your answer?
I put both.
I put both as well. So before engaging in any performance disciplinary process, we want to do an evaluation of the ADA. And so you would work with your HR business partner on the performance piece of that, and you would work with our team on the ADA. And that can help us separate some of those discriminatory things. But we do want to go through and make sure we're at least doing that interactive process piece and doing some evaluations through that before getting into some of the performance disciplinary pieces if we're going there. Now, coaching is typically okay. And so there's a little bit difference between those two things too, to work with our team and the HR business partner. They're really good about notifying us when meetings get going and happen. And we've also worked with including them when situations have come across our desk. I just had one this morning. So thanks for your input. If you haven't already, make sure you go ahead and close that poll. And we have one last scenario to read through.
We do. This is our last one. And I think this one is just a question and letting us know in the chat. A manager doubts an employee's need for an accommodation because they look fine and seem capable. So how might this mindset impact compliance and workplace inclusion? And as you're thinking about this, this is kind of a tough one, and we covered this throughout the presentation, but this is when we discussed that disabilities are not visible. So just by dismissing the request based on appearance, we just want to make sure that it risks both the legal and ethical missteps. So just being aware of that. And yep, not safe. And then we just want that friendly work environment for all our employees. So
most people just want to be heard. You know, people want a chance to have their voice heard. They want to be listened to. Just because we don't think that they have the issue they do, it's very real to them. And so making sure that we're taking care of people.
Thank you, Christy. So We are going to move on. We just have a few more slides, and with time, yep, creating the high. So hopefully you all got some good information today. Maybe learned something new, or you just wanted to see Beth and I on this afternoon wearing similar outfits, or just it was a good refresher. We do appreciate you joining us today. And it can be hard to remember all of this, and so that's why we are here for you. So we just like to leave you with just a couple of final takeaways. So here you go.
I put this at the end because if you remember nothing else, here you go. Those were all great insights. You guys did cover several things. So these are the common myths and questions we often get. Is ADHD covered? Well, ADHD is a diagnosis, and so it's not specifically covered. But if there are accommodations needed to help the person work and manage their ADHD, those could potentially be covered. My last employer, I've told enough of you. I think my last employer was Goodwill, and I would often have people call and say, my so-and-so has a disability. Can they come work for you? And I would say, can they run a cash register? And more importantly, do they want to? So that's my answer to, is ADHD covered? I don't have a disability. Why do I need this? If there is a medical condition that is affecting the ability to perform the job, those are all reviewed under that umbrella of the ADA. So someone could be recovering post-surgery and temporarily can only lift 20 pounds. And the department may be able to make that accommodation. They may not. So then it goes to FMLA leave, but it's at least worth exploring. I don't want anyone in my department to know I have an ADA accommodation. While we don't discuss anyone's medical needs or an actual accommodation, sometimes people do notice what's going on. I just, again, had the department in the parking garage the other day. My common response to how do you deal with other employees in the department is to really just ask that employee, like, hey, is there a need that you would like to discuss? I'd be happy to sit down and evaluate your needs and talk about what you might need to get the job done. And one of the things we do this presentation for and to remind everyone is just remember not to make judgments on what other people have or are doing. If it affects your performance, then you should go talk to your manager about it. But otherwise, tweaking the job reasonably where it doesn't affect anyone else's employment should be a positive thing to help someone else do the job. There's an example I have of the boxes and looking over the fence and what's fair and what's equal, and I can get into that discussion with someone if they have a question later on. But we don't tell anyone that someone has an accommodation, but we will ask anyone who questions if they have a need they'd like to talk to. And again, that goes to, why does Joe get to or not have to? And then, is pregnancy a disability? Pregnancy is not considered a disability, but it does have its own protection under temporary accommodations. It's the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. It's relatively new, so we're working through, and basically, since it's temporary, 9 months or less, or maybe just a little bit more with nursing, generally we're going to provide most reasonable accommodations to someone who's pregnant to help them get their work done and meet the job requirements. So that is common myths that we deal with. One of the things we can all start doing better is working on just everyday inclusion, making people feel invited and welcome into our workplaces and on our teams. And not just our friends or those people that we've worked with for 20 years, but the new people. It's really hard to connect with that person that you just don't click with, right? But a stranger is really just someone you haven't yet met. So specifically, make sure you're communicating respectfully. Avoid assumptions or retaliation. Consider how you could make your environment and activities more accessible. Make sure everyone can participate in meetings. Accessibility is considered when you're creating content. Flyers, posters, digital content, notices, signs, events for people with vision, hearing impairment, learning differences, language barriers. Consider reducing or replacing personal hygiene products such as perfumes, laundry detergent, hair products. That's been becoming more and more of a common thing out in the public, let alone within our workplaces. So support coworkers who may have a disability disclosed or undisclosed. Make sure to check with them and not force assistance. We just did a seminar the other day where people talked about someone coming up and just starting to push their chair. That's a little bit like someone coming up and just pushing you while you're walking, that you want to make sure that the help is needed or invited. That wheelchair is part of their body. It's be the same thing as just grabbing your arm. You wouldn't like that either. Choice is very important. Keeping these things in mind, you don't have to answer in the chat. We originally had that, but since we're hitting on time, what's one small thing that you do or could do to make your workplace more accessible?
So yeah, thanks for hanging with us today. But in closing, we want to let you know that any ADA requests from the public should be directed to the Lincoln Commission on Human Rights as they handle those inquiries. And then anything related for the employment ADA questions or accommodation requests is reach out to Beth and I. We're here to support you all and help ensure the process is handled correctly. And our job is just to help you navigate the ADA and do the right thing. So we're here for you and we like to hear from you. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you, Jody.